All right, today we are cracking open the law's official rulebook on a topic we all think we get: how we treat other people's stuff. But trust me, the law has some really specific and surprisingly serious chapters on this. We're taking a deep dive into a crime called malicious mischief.
So let's jump right in with a question. Picture these three things: someone dragging a key down the side of a shiny new car, someone putting something nasty into a public water fountain, and someone tagging a historic monument with graffiti. I mean, they seem like they're on totally different planets in terms of seriousness, right? But here's the thing. In the eyes of the law, they're all just branches on the exact same tree. They're all different flavors of malicious mischief.
So what is this thing, really? Well, at its core, under Article 327 of the Revised Penal Code, malicious mischief is when you deliberately cause damage to property that isn't yours. Now, that word, deliberately, is everything. And the second part of the definition is just as critical. You have to do it without any just cause. No good reason. This isn't about accidents. This is about a choice. A willful act of destruction that comes from a place of anger or spite, or maybe just a twisted sense of fun.
Okay, but to really get how this works, you have to understand that just breaking something isn't automatically a crime. I mean, accidents happen, right? A baseball flies through a window. That's not what we're talking about. The law is looking for a very specific combination of things. You can think of it like a recipe.
And for this particular crime, the law's recipe needs two essential ingredients. If you're missing either one of them, the whole charge just falls apart. So let's see what they are. And here they are. First up, you have the guilty action. In legal speak, they call it actus reus. This is the physical part, the actual smashing or scratching or spraying. It's the what you did. But the second ingredient, and honestly, the more important one, is the guilty mind, or mens rea. This isn't about what you did, it's about what you were thinking when you did it. It's the proof that you meant to cause the damage. Let's dig into that guilty action a little. It can be super obvious, like shattering a phone screen. Or it can be more subtle, like messing with a machine so it doesn't work right anymore. But the key thing to get here is that the law doesn't really care how big the damage is at first. It can be incredibly minor.
And this really gets to the soul of the issue. The law's first question isn't how much did that cost? It's, did you do it on purpose? That tiny, deliberate scratch on a car door is, in this legal context, way more significant than, say, accidentally knocking over and breaking an entire shelf of expensive vases. Which brings us right back to the guilty mind. This is the secret sauce for the entire recipe. This is the magic ingredient that turns a clumsy mistake into a criminal act. Think about it. You trip and knock over a vase. That's an accident. But you look at the vase, you think, I really hate that vase. And then you deliberately push it off the table. That's malicious mischief. The result is the same, a broken vase. But the intent, that's what changes everything.
So as you'd expect, the common ways to defend against this charge are all about proving you didn't have that guilty mind. You can say it was a total accident. You can argue you didn't have intent, like maybe you were trying to fix something and didn't realize your action would break it. Or, and this is a big one, you can argue you were justified. Breaking a car window is usually a crime. But breaking that same window to pull a child out of a dangerously hot car, that is not a crime. You had a just cause, and the law gets that your intent wasn't to destroy, but to save.
Okay, so we've got the basics down. If you deliberately break something without a good reason, it's a crime. But this is where the law's rulebook starts getting way more interesting. It has these special chapters for when property damage isn't just a private issue between a couple of people. It's for when it affects all of us. This is where the crime and the punishment starts to level up. You see, not all property is created equal in the law. There is a huge difference between keying your neighbor's car and, say, poisoning the town's water supply. The first act hurts one person. The second one hurts the entire community. And you better believe the law treats that distinction very, very seriously.
So how does this crime get a power-up? Article 328 lays out a few ways. If you get in the way of a public function, if you use dangerous stuff like poison, if you spread disease among livestock, or if you damage property that is considered to be of public importance.
And what does the law mean by property of public importance? We're not just talking about any old public bench here. We are talking about the pillars of our civic life. Things like the National Museum or the National Library, the places that hold our shared culture. Public archives, the places that hold our history. We're talking about critical infrastructure, the hardware of our society, like roads and water systems, even public parks and promenades. Damaging these things isn't just vandalism. It's seen as an attack on the public itself. And the penalties absolutely reflect how serious this is. They scale right up with the financial costs of the damage. As you can see on the chart, if you cause more than 200,000 pesos in damage to something like a public water main, the potential prison sentence can jump to over 4 years. But we can go even higher on the scale. There's another level of property damage that the law considers a critical hit, an act that doesn't just inconvenience society, but one that actively puts it in danger by attacking its most vital systems. Yeah, if damaging a public park is leveling up, this is the boss battle. We're moving beyond just damaging static objects. We are now in the realm of damaging the active, living systems that connect us and keep us safe, our lines of communication and our transportation networks. This is Article 330, and its purpose is incredibly specific and vital: to protect our means of communication. The law literally calls out railways and, what was the high-tech of the day, telegraph and telephone lines. It's so detailed it even includes things like signal boxes and cables used for the railway. And here is the single most important change in thinking. With Article 330, the law's focus does a complete 180. It's no longer about the replacement cost of a piece of metal or some cable. The crime isn't measured in pesos anymore. It's measured in the amount of chaos, disruption, and pure danger that comes from that one single act of damage. And the penalties, they show exactly how serious that shift is. Article 330 basically has 2 tiers. If you just damage a communication line, you could face up to 6 years. But if that damage directly causes an accident, like a train derailing, the maximum penalty doubles to 12 years. 12 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. We started this whole conversation talking about a key scratch on a car, and now we're talking about a penalty that's up there with some serious violent crimes. It is a massive, massive leap, and there is a very clear reason why. So, why is it so incredibly severe? It's actually really simple. At this point, you have crossed a critical line. This isn't just about property anymore. Messing with a railway signal that causes a train to crash isn't mischief. It's an act that directly and predictably puts human lives at risk. The law is punishing the consequence, and the potential for a catastrophic loss of life is the worst consequence there is. There is one more special category we need to look at. This one isn't about public safety or money in quite the same way. It's about protecting things that have a totally different kind of value, a cultural, historical value. This is about protecting our shared story. Article 331 basically creates a protective bubble around things like statues, public monuments, and paintings. Why? Because these things aren't just objects. A monument isn't just a block of stone. It's a physical piece of a historical moment. A public painting isn't just some canvas and paint. It's part of our collective cultural DNA. These things belong to all of us, and damaging them is like ripping a page out of our shared history book. But it's interesting. The law actually makes a distinction here. Damaging a monument is treated way more seriously than damaging a public painting. The penalty jumps from a maximum of 30 days to over 2 years in prison. The thinking here is likely that monuments are seen as these permanent, central pillars of our public identity and story. Okay, so we have been through the basic crime, the special community cases, the attacks on critical infrastructure, and the damage to our heritage. Now let's put it all together. Let's look at the final penalty scoreboard and see how this all stacks up. But first, there's one last piece of the puzzle we need. What about all the acts of vandalism that don't really fit into any of these special boxes? You know, the simple, everyday act of keying a car or smashing a window just because you're angry. For that, the law has a catch-all category, Article 329, which is just called Other Mischiefs. This is your baseline, your standard issue malicious mischief. It's the default crime when you intentionally damage someone's private property. Just like the special cases, the penalties are tied to the value of the damage, but the ceiling is much, much lower. Even if you cause more than 200,000 pesos in damage, the maximum prison time still tops out at just 6 months. And it all comes together right here on our final scoreboard. Just look at this pyramid of seriousness. We start at the bottom with other mischief, damaging private property, which harms an individual, topping out at 6 months. Then we start to climb. Damaging public paintings is actually seen as less serious, but damaging a monument, our heritage, jumps the penalty to over 2 years. Messing with public services, like water under Article 328, gets you over 4 years. Disrupting communication lines can hit 6 years.
And then, at the very, very top of the pyramid, causing an accident that endangers lives. And that's the 12-year maximum. So, if you take only one thing away from this entire explainer, let it be this. The legal system creates this incredibly clear ladder of severity. And as you climb that ladder, the one thing that increases with every single step is the scope of the impact. The law's main question isn't just what did you break? It's whose life, whose community, whose safety did your actions mess with? The more people you affect, the more serious the crime. Period.
So in the end, you can see that malicious mischief is so much more than just simple vandalism. It's this whole spectrum of offenses that stretches from a small personal act of spite all the way to a major attack on public safety. And across that entire spectrum, the two guiding stars for the law are always the same. What was the intent in your mind, and what was the impact on the world? Which, of course, leaves us with one final and kind of huge question. The entire system we've just talked about hinges on that secret sauce, the guilty mind, that criminal intent. But if intent is the absolute key that turns the lock on a criminal charge, how can a court, which is just made up of other people, ever truly 100% know what was going on inside someone else's head at that exact moment? And that right there is one of the biggest challenges in the entire concept of justice.